Okay, I think we'll get started. My name is Yardena Hodkin, or as you see on my cards, Dana Hodkin, and I work at the NYU Child Study Center. And today I want to talk about 6 very powerful behavioral tools that we could be using in our everyday lives with our children. Before we get started working on that, I'd like you for a moment to think about all of the moms and dads that you know in your life, and if you're a mom or dad, you could include yourself in this. And I'd like you to think about all the time that these moms and dads spend each and every day with their children, picking their children up from school, dropping their children off at school, carpooling to various activities, doing homework with their children, playing with their children. And add up all of that time of all of those moms and dads that you know, including yourself. Takes a little bit. And now I'd like you to imagine what these parents' lives would look like if they were actually able to enjoy this time with their children, if they were actually able to enjoy and really find a lot of happiness in these day-to-day events with their children. Not just feeling the happiness when their children go down for a nap or go to sleep for the night or are at school, but the actual happiness of interacting with their kids on a day-to-day basis. If we kind of look around us, there's something that we have, something very personal about each and every one of us. Something very personal about me and every single person in this room and every single person that you meet walking down the street or in the supermarket. And that's that at their very core and at their very essence, they want happiness, right? They want to feel like they are living a life worth living. But what we see in the United States, at least, is something pretty scary. Over 80% of individuals right now in the United States report that they're actually feeling as though they're languishing, right? Not flourishing. As though they're stuck in a rut, wanting more, yet not necessarily diagnosable with the disorder, kind of just functioning and going through their lives, but not really achieving the happiness in parenting or in their work life or in their life in general that they really wish they could be achieving. 80%. In the United States today, rates of depression are actually 10 times higher than they were in the 1960s. And the average age of the onset of depression used to be 29 and a half. Today it's 14 and a half. We're seeing depression at younger and younger ages. A study conducted recently in American colleges indicated that 45% of students felt so depressed, quote, they had difficulty functioning. So this is kind of the happiness issue is kind of an issue that we face in the society as a whole. Other countries are kind of following the United States' footsteps as well. 52% in Britain said they were happy compared to 36% in 2005. Despite the fact that the British have actually tripled their wealth over the last half century. So we seem to see this really interesting paradox that with levels of material prosperity on the rise in the United States as well as many other Western countries, we're not necessarily becoming happier for it. And as leading researchers in the field of positive psychology ask, if we are so rich, why aren't we happy? It's called the happiness paradox. So over the past 2 decades, the field called positive psychology has emerged to kind of provide evidence-based answers and to guide practitioners. And whereas psychology for a very long time focused on psychopathology, right? So getting people from -1 to 0. Taking people who had anxiety, taking people who had depression, and kind of getting them to a level of functioning. Where the field is moving, at least the field of positive psychology is moving right now, is actually taking those people who are at a 0, taking those people who are functioning, going through the day-to-day parts of their life, but not being their happiness, not actually functioning at their best, and not really enjoying their lives as much as they could be enjoying their lives, and to help those people actually get from a 0 to a 1. So over the past several years, research on positive psychology interventions, or PPIs, specific interventions that we could actually be doing in our everyday life that are evidence-based to make us happier, have really proliferated. And there's been just a tremendous amount of research on these positive psychology interventions. If we actually look at parents, and especially young parents or parents of kids going through middle school, these parents are actually a pretty unhappy demographic. And it's really kind of striking to see the statistics on that. And especially when our kids have diverse needs and diverse kind of things that we have to give them on a day-to-day basis, that challenge becomes even harder for many parents. So what I want to do today is kind of tie two very important pieces of research in the field of psychology together. Research on behavior change, on how to actually get children to change their behaviors in positive ways, and also the research on positive psychology, ways in which our children and ourselves can actually become happier. So kind of with the marriage of these two very powerful areas of psychology, I want to bring you 6 practical tools that can be used right away in your own lives to actually transform your parenting and hopefully make your experience of parenting much more positive. So the 6 skills are positive reinforcement, right? We've all heard of positive reinforcement, but we're going to hear about positive reinforcement revamped. Active ignoring. So it's kind of a new thing to probably a lot of people, and we'll talk a little bit about that entails. What that entails, your self-care, which we'll kind of talk about as category under active ignoring. Special time, which is an intervention that could be done with kids of any age, an intervention which is incredibly effective and important. Active constructive responding, which refers to a kind of very specific way of responding to our children. Kindness and savoring. So I hope to go through all 6 of these, and because we need our token, tacky mnemonic to remember them, when in doubt and you don't know what to do with your kids, just PaySACS. So if you look at the PAYSAKS, so if you need a mnemonic, there you go. So let's start with the first one, positive reinforcement. So we've all heard a lot about positive reinforcement, but we're going to talk about it in a little bit of a different way today, and hopefully a way that could be really powerful for many of you in your day-to-day lives with your kids. So many people are interested in how we could actually change human behavior, how we could change our spouses' behaviors, how we could change our family members' behaviors, how we could change our in-laws' behaviors, right? We're fascinated with the idea of how we could actually change other people's behaviors. And thousands of studies have demonstrated with animals, with human beings, that by far the most powerful way to change human behavior is through something called positive reinforcement, through choosing very specific targeted behaviors and reinforcing them in a systematic way. So there are a few different types of positive reinforcement, right? We have verbal reinforcement, which is praise. And many times parents sometimes fall into the pitfall of giving something called an unlabeled praise. That's saying things to your kids like, great, wow, good job. And that's great, and that's a good thing, but it's really not as powerful as something called labeled praises. Labeled praises are a specific type of verbal reinforcement where you tell your child exactly what you like about what they just did. I love the way you just put your shoes in your closet. I love the way you just hung up your coat. I love the way you just took your plate and put it in the sink. And the reason labeled praises are so important is because the data suggests that, especially for kids with ADHD and kids with behavioral issues, when a person gives an unlabeled praise, kids don't generally make the connection between the praise itself and the action that they just did. So you could be saying great job or wow, and they're not connecting it to what they actually did, and as a result, the behavior is not reinforced. So giving labeled praises where you tell your child specifically and exactly what you liked about what they just did is incredibly important and powerful. Nonverbal reinforcement includes things like tapping your kid on the back, giving them a loving hug, giving them a kiss. If your kid doesn't not like that type of reinforcement, and that's really powerful when it accompanies a labeled praise. Tangibles, right, which I'm sure everyone here is very familiar with as using for rewards, could also be really, really effective. Prizes, toys, token economies where children are kind of working up towards different salient prizes can be really effective for children. And what the research suggests, which is really fascinating, is when our goal is actually not just to reinforce a specific behavior, which definitely has a place, but just to build our child's self-esteem in general, to build our child's resilience in general, there's a type of praise we could be giving that could be especially important, and that's praising effort, not necessarily the results. So if your child got 100 on the test, instead of praising them for getting 100 on the test or for their brains, you could actually do a lot for your child's self-esteem and development of resilience by praising the effort that they put into it. I love the way you studied so hard for that test. I love the way you worked so hard for that test. And that type of compliment specifically has been linked to positive outcomes such as self-esteem and resilience. So when we're talking about a reward system, which I'm sure most of you have tried at some point, and many probably have failed because many reward systems do fail. The reason that many of them fail is because they don't meet specific kind of criteria and guidelines that we know actually works to help change behavior. So I'm going to go through some of the common pitfalls that people have when they make these reward systems and talk about ways that we could make more effective reward systems. So reward systems should always target specific targeted behaviors. A lot of times parents come in and they tell me, well, I want to, and the child, let's say their child has ADHD, I want him to brush his teeth in the morning, I want him to make his bed, I want him to shower, I want him to be on time to the bus, I want him to do his homework, and they kind of come up with a whole bunch of different things that they'd like to see changed about their child. And they're constantly giving their child negative feedback throughout the day for a number of different items. So reward systems are actually most powerful when parents really choose their battles and they focus on 2, maximum 3 behaviors at a time that they want changed. Because what happens if you yell at your child for brushing their teeth and for not getting dressed on time and for a bunch of different things, they're actually not going to listen very much and they're going to probably tune out the nagging at some point. So what reward systems generally want to focus on 2 or 3 really specific targeted behaviors. We also want to frame behaviors in the positive, and this could sometimes be difficult when we want to try to train a child out of a behavior that they're doing. So for example, if your child is not sharing, we want to frame the behavior as sharing and then reward every time they share. If the behavior is yelling, that we want to stop is yelling at their siblings, we want to think of the positive opposite, right, which is keeping a calm voice, and then rewarding at certain intervals appropriately. And this is really important because the data suggests that people, and this is relevant for all different types of people, are more likely to work towards positive goals than kind of the don'ts. So when we give children positive goals and very specific and very few positive goals to work towards at a time, we actually put them in the best position to actually accomplish those goals. We want to award points for the targeted behaviors, right? So the 2 or 3 that we choose. And consistency is really key. Sometimes we'll put together a great reward system for a parent, and it'll be going really well for a while, and then it will suddenly start faltering. And when I ask and find out what's going on, it turns out often the parent is still delivering the results, right? They're still delivering the reward, 10 minutes of iPod time after brushing their teeth, or a trip to the pizza store, even if the child's not doing the behaviors that they needed to get there. Or they're still giving them the sticker, because otherwise the child will have a meltdown. So we have to be really, really consistent. And the data on parenting in general shows that there are a few different types of parents, right? There are permissive parents who are really high in warmth, but really low on expectations, right? And that's not the most effective type of parenting. Then there are parents who are authoritarian parents, right? Who are really low on warmth and really high on structure and expectations. And that works a little better, but still not really where we'd want to be. The most effective parents are parents who are authoritative. Parents who are high in warmth, but also high in expectations. And when you have a marriage of being high in warmth and also high in expectations, you're actually setting your child up for the most success. So when we think we're being kind to a child by kind of giving them the points or giving them the reward, even if they don't kind of deserve it, or even if they didn't kind of get the targeted behaviors, we're actually setting the plan up for failure. And the last point, which is kind of really important, is that rewards that we offer to our children in these behavior plans have to be exceptionally salient to the child. Now, we don't have to break the bank. Sometimes parents think they have to go out and buy a new dog or the latest video game to kind of get their child into the plan, but they do have to be salient. Sometimes parents will kind of say, okay, we'll go out to pizza, but the child doesn't really like going out with their parents to pizza much, or the parent dynamic is strained at that point, and the children don't really want that very much at all. So just to kind of illustrate how important a kid's preference is in the behavior plan itself, I'm just going to pull up a short clip that I think will illustrate it.
Oh, man, come in now. Your brother's working and your father's out buying one of those bowls for your toilet, so I got the whole house to myself. Is that my large fork?
Yeah, it is. That's why I came by. I wanted to return this. breakfast.
Oh, well, I didn't want to say anything, but that happens to be a very good fork.
I know. That's why it took so long. I love it. Listen, I wanted to talk to you about Deborah's birthday.
Oh, my God, talk about birthdays. Your birthday gift to me finally came this morning. And did you know you sent me a box of pears?
Yeah.
From a place called Fruit of the Month?
That's right. How are they?
Oh, they're very nice pears. But there's so many of them. There are over a dozen pears. What am I supposed to do with all those pears?
Well, I think you're supposed to eat them.
Myself?
You and Dad and Robert.
How many pears can Robert eat? I appreciate the thought, Raymond, but please, don't ever send us any more food again, okay?
Well, another box is coming next month.
What? More pears?
No, it's a different fruit every month.
Every month?
Yes, that's why they call it Fruit of the Month Club.
It's a club? Oh, what am I going to do with all this fruit?
Well, and most people like it, Ma. You share it with all your friends.
Which friends?
I don't know. Lee and Stan.
Lee and Stan buy their own fruit.
Give it away.
Why did you do this with me? I can't talk. There's too much fruit in the house.
I'm sorry, Ma. Hey, Marie. Oh, Ray.
You know that the fruit keeps coming month after month? He's got us in some kind of a cult.
It's not a cult, Ma. It's a club.
What do you mean month after month? For how long?
A year.
My God, are you out of your mind?
I'm so sorry, Dad.
What do you think we are, invalids? We can't go out and get our own fruit?
All right, I'm canceling the food club.
Oh, good. Thank you, Brandon. Thanks. And don't do that again. Like we don't have enough problems.
Okay, listen, I gotta...
Okay. So, lesson is, make sure the rewards that you're offering your child from the behavior plan are salient, and that's really key. And often, I'll actually bring the child into the room and have the child create a wish list, what they wish they had. And it doesn't have to be expensive things. Sometimes it's just getting to choose what their mom makes for a dessert on Shabbos. We're getting to help their mom make a dessert. And those things could be really important, but having your child as a collaborator on the plan is really key. Because if they're a collaborator on it, they're making the plan, they're getting the point to actually earn up to things that they really want, they're going to be invested in the plan, and that's already half the battle being won. So recently a bunch of families kind of presented with a very similar issue. They had kids who had ADHD or were on the spectrum, and they had a tremendous amount of difficulty kind of getting their family out in the morning. Kids would kind of take a long time to put on their clothes, a long time to come downstairs. So we use this principle of positive reinforcement to come up with a behavior plan that actually works really, really beautifully for a bunch of families. So what the behavior plan basically is, and the kid kind of practices it and is in on it in the office, and we actually practice it before they start doing it at home, is that the child wakes up in the morning, the parent comes and tags the child. It's like a game show. The parent comes and tags the child and says, "You're it." Then the parent sets up a timer in the kid's room. Sometimes they use their cell phone or an iPad if everything else is black, so they can't play games, and kind of set up a timer that has 10 minutes, right, on the timer. And the child and the parents have laid out the clothes the night before, and the child actually has 10 minutes to get dressed, right, put on their socks, put on their shoes, put on their clothes, and get down the stairs and hit the kitchen island when they're done. And this has worked really, really, really beautifully in a bunch of different families, because when you make something that's difficult and a chore into a game and something that has a time pressure to it and something that could be positively reinforced, right, the children then get to, in some homes they get to have time to play games before they leave, and in some homes they actually get to choose their breakfast, right? In some homes they're earning up Shopkins points towards different things. So when they actually kind of have that reinforcement in the morning, it starts the day off in a much more positive way. Instead of parents kind of yelling at the children kind of taking their time, it starts the day off much more positively. Those aren't actual people, it's just people I found online. The second behavioral tool is something called active ignoring. And this is really important during times when our children are kind of engaging in really frustrating or really annoying behaviors to get our attention. Now, just to preface, we never want to use active ignoring when a behavior is destructive or aggressive, right? Active ignoring is not we definitely don't want to be ignoring those times. Active ignoring is perfect for the time when our child is yelling at us, when our child is saying inappropriate things to us, when our child might be tantruming or cursing at us, when our child might be humming a song in the back of the car that's incredibly annoying, right? And the function is to get our attention, or tapping on the table to get our attention, kind of in an overly done way, and to get us to kind of get frustrated at them. That's when active ignoring becomes especially useful. So active ignoring basically involves not giving the reinforcement, right? Not giving the attention to attention-seeking behaviors that our children are doing. So when our children are telling us how we're the worst mommy and tati in the entire world, right? Those are the times when we want to be using active ignoring, if it's in the context of a tantrum, and if it's the function is to get our kind of negative attention in the moment. And the data suggests, which is really pretty fascinating, is that even both positive and negative attention is actually reinforcing. So even if we react to these behaviors by yelling and screaming at our child and kind of engaging in it with them, that in itself is reinforcing, and that will make the behavior more likely to increase in the future. Turns out kids are pretty excited about getting kind of a rise out of mom and dad and getting them to react in the moment. So active ignoring basically involves, in those moments, using both verbal and nonverbal reactions to our child when they're doing this. So a lot of parents are really good at the verbal one, right? They're able to just not respond, but they'll do things like roll their eyes, or make a face. And we want to avoid that too, because even that could be reinforcing. So we want to actually use active ignoring and use no verbal and nonverbal reactions in the moment to our child. We could turn our head away, we could walk away. If we needed to for our own sanity, we could even go to a different room. But the point is that you don't want to give attention to the tantrums. You don't want to give attention to the negative behaviors. You want to active ignore, ideally, until the child stops engaging in the negative attention-seeking behavior. And then you want to immediately find something that the child is doing that's good. It could be sitting quietly. It could be looking out the window if you're in a car. It could be playing a game if they're kind of went to calm down a little bit or playing a game on their phone, and praise that behavior right away.
Quick question.
Yeah, sure.
Is it okay to, like, let's say your child keeps doing something really annoying, after a while of ignoring, if you didn't notice, like, I'm ignoring you on purpose, can you do that and then continue to be quiet afterwards?
So that's a great question. Yeah, so something really important to know is that when you active ignore, something called the Extinction Burst happens, right? So when you try this at home, you're going to see something called an Extinction Burst, which means that before the behavior gets better and before they stop, it's usually going to get worse, right? Because they're used to you reacting. They're used to getting reinforcement from you. So when the behavior gets worse, you want to still continue to active ignore. And the reason, to not do that, and the reason that that's really, really important is because that shows your child, if you would react in the moment, right, when they're kind of ratcheting it up a level, what would that show your child? That they have to take it to the next level in order to be reinforced, right? So that would turn tantrums into just a little bit of tantruming to even more intense tantruming, and then you react, and then they get it. Then they get the reinforcement they want. So you actually want to active ignore completely throughout. You could tell them in advance that whenever you do this in this behavior, I love you so much, but I'm just going to not respond to it. And you could kind of preface it in advance so that they know what they're doing.
Okay.
But in the moment, you want to be giving no reinforcement. I'll take questions at the end just because I'm in a rush. So when we yell, right, when we kind of give in and we had a long day and it's really difficult to kind of maintain our composure and active ignore, and seethe inside and not really say anything in the moment, when we yell, it's actually a little scary because there's a process called modeling, right? Children often pick up on behaviors because it's modeled by peers. It's modeled by parents. So when we respond to a child being Pcit or being inappropriate, right, with us by yelling and screaming, that actually teaches the child a very powerful message. That when there's something in mom's life that she doesn't like, she will blow up and she will scream. And unfortunately, that translates to a bunch of different situations. So then when these kids are in classroom settings or with a sibling and something happens that they don't like, something happens that they did not want to happen, something happens that frustrates them, they learn that they then should yell in those situations. And modeling is incredibly, incredibly powerful. Another downside of kind of yelling and blowing up in the moment at our children is the idea that they're just going to start tuning us out, right? If we're yelling about them about so many different things every day and kids are engaging in frustrating behavior after frustrating behavior, at a certain point they might start tuning us out. So it's so important to kind of be able to active ignore in the moment, or of course if a behavior is aggressive or destructive, to kind of deal with that appropriately as well. So how does a parent kind of get themselves to the point where they're able to active ignore or walk to another room and maintain composure during those moments, so during a tantrum or during a frustrating behavior? So this kind of boils down to something called a parent self-care. And we know that when we go on airplanes, what do they tell us with the safety masks? To put it on yourself first and then put it on for your child. But often as parents, we're so busy putting on our kids' masks and taking care of our kids' needs that we're actually not thinking about our own safety mask. And it's really important, especially as parents with a lot on our mind and a lot on our plate, to really, really take the time to put on our mask, whatever that means for us. For some people, it might mean going out once a week to just get themselves a smoothie and sit in the car and drink it, right? For some people, it might mean just having 30 minutes to go swimming, in a local pool. Everyone's self-care is different, but it's so, so, so critical. When I used to work at Chai Lifeline Camp Simcha, and the head counselor right before each camp session, and as you can imagine, the camp sessions were very intense, she would tell us that we're like cars, right? And we have to fill ourselves up with gas if we need to be able to give. And it's the same thing with parents, right? That they need to be able to kind of help themselves and really introduce happiness rituals into their life, small things that they do for themselves on a weekly basis where they could just breathe and say, okay, I'm taking care of myself for 5 minutes. And these don't have to be expensive things. These don't have to be incredibly time-consuming things, but they are necessary. So I'd like you all to think right now of one happiness ritual, one self-care ritual that you could do for yourself on a weekly basis. And if you have a pen, write it down. But it's so key to being able to kind of do these active ignoring behaviors and do the positive reinforcement behaviors and give ourselves fully to our kids. Okay, I see some pens moving. And there's some really fascinating data specifically on moms that this is really kind of mind-blowing if you think about it. A mom's satisfaction with her life is more important to a young child's social and emotional skills than her education, her income, whether she has a job, and the amount of time the kid spends in childcare. Right? Our satisfaction with life, our own well-being and levels of happiness are really, really crucial to our child's social and emotional development. Even more crucial than how much time a child spends in childcare. So the third behavioral tool that I want to move towards is something called special time. And this is something we're going to talk a little bit first about how to do it for kids aged 2 to 7, and then how to do it for older kids as well. So at NYU, we run a specific type of therapy called Pcit, or Parent-Child Interaction Therapy. And this is basically one of the best evidence-based treatments for kids who have behavioral issues and oppositional issues at home. And it's really been pretty research-based to kind of really significantly decrease those oppositional behaviors. What we do is part of the office converts into a playroom, and we actually have a double-sided mirror. And we coach parents from like a little bug in the ear as they're interacting and playing with their child. And it's really an incredible type of treatment to see over time how the behavioral issues drop and it's really been quite research supported. So one small part of Pcit, Parent-Child Interaction Therapy, is something called CDI, Child-Directed Interaction. And it's basically a phase, right, of treatment in which a parent has to master a certain number of skills and have special time with their child, which is 5 minutes of just giving attention to that one child each and every day. And during this 5-minute period where they're just spending time with this one child individually, so one parent at a time would do the special time, so let's say mom and her child, and then if a dad also did special time, it would be dad and the child. During that 5-minute period, there's no cell phones, right, no technology, you're focused on the child and literally playing with the child on the floor. And this is for kids aged 2 to 7. So the do skills, right, the skills that we want a parent to do during special time are 5 things, and the acronym is PRIDE. So P, praise. You want to be giving labeled praises, really kind of with a lot of frequency during this time period. R, reflect. So whatever verbalization your child makes during this 5-minute time period, you want to actually reflect. It kind of sounds like a creepy therapist type of thing to be, oh, you're feeling sad, you're excited. But kids actually respond really well to it developmentally, and they really, really like it when their parents are reflecting what they're saying. I is imitate. So if your child's building with blocks, you want to be building with blocks. If your child's drawing a circle on her paper, you better believe you want to be drawing a circle on their paper. And part of the reason the imitate piece is so important is because it actually shows your child that you think that what she's doing is smart and you think what she's doing is important. And that kind of is really helpful in building that relationship and building a child's self-esteem. D is describe, so you want to kind of be like a running sports commentary on your child as they're playing, and now you're putting the blue block on top of the pink block. And this is important because it really helps your child focus on the play, which is helpful and healthy for them, but also helps you focus on their play as well. A lot of times when a parent is playing with the child, it consists of the child kind of playing on the floor and the parent sitting there and texting or drawing their own picture. This is the way that they could actually play together. It's also been shown to kind of help kids' social skills, right? Because you're teaching them not just parallel play of mommy drawing as you're drawing right here, but actually drawing together and working together. And the last one is enjoy, right? And that's kind of a hard one to have, that you could use all these skills from here till tomorrow, but they're going to be dry unless you could actually get yourself to enjoy the play. And this holds true for older kids as well. If you could get yourself to enjoy your special time with an older kid, that becomes incredibly salient for them and helpful for the process. During this 5-minute special time period, there are 3 things that you can't do. 3 things that we tell parents not to do. Doesn't mean you can't do these things at other points, right, necessarily, especially the questions one. But during this 5-minute play period, we don't want to do any of this. And the reason is because we want to kind of focus our attention on the child and let the child lead the play. Sometimes when a parent just institutes this 5-minute special time and does it consistently with kind of using the skills and hitting mastery on all these skills, they actually see a really significant reduction in behavioral issues over time because children have their kind of own time with the parent to get their parents' attention. So the don't skills, no questions during this 5-minute period, no commands, and no criticism. So what if a child misbehaves during special time? We want to active ignore, right? So if a child starts throwing the block and it's not destructive or aggressive, we want to kind of turn our head away, play with our own toys and active ignore until the behavior stops and then reinforce whatever it is they're doing. So if they're sitting quietly, we could say, great job sitting quietly. If their actions do become aggressive or destructive during special time, we just say, because you hit mommy, special time is ending today, but I'm sure we'll be able to do it tomorrow. So for kids, it's 5 minutes a day. For adolescents, you could also have a set time each week to go out, so something which is really powerful for an older kid is just taking them out to ice cream, alone time with me and mom or me and dad once a week, showing them that you're turning off your cell phone, putting it on the table, and focusing completely on the child. We want to have no other siblings around during special time, and I know this could be hard in larger families, and parents really find creative ways to do it. They get the babysitter involved, they get the dad involved, they close themselves up in a room, they go out on a walk, whatever they need to do to kind of give the child the individual attention, but that's really key. And a lot of parents end up doing this for all their kids, not just their kids with behavioral issues, because it's so salient and helpful. You want to set yourself up for success, right? So you're not putting out finger paint, you're not putting out messy toys, you're not putting out toys with really strict rules because you don't want to have to discipline them during this time, right? Action figures work well if they could use it non-aggressively. Little dolls work well, certain crayons and markers might work well. We want to also think about eye gazing versus eye contact. Many of us are very good at eye contact, but there's actually been some really fascinating research on charismatic people and what charismatic people actually do differently to create relationships with others. And one of the findings that they had is that charismatic people don't only kind of make eye contact, they do something called eye gaze, which is what you're doing essentially when you're trying to look at what the other person's eye color is. That kind of accomplishes it. And you don't want to obviously be looking at them, your child like that the whole time, but even once throughout a conversation of noticing your child's eye color is enough to kind of create that connection in terms of eye contact. And charismatic people also, interestingly, always find really interesting questions to ask about the other person. So instead of kind of being focused on themselves and talking about themselves, they're finding the most interesting questions to ask the other person. So that kind of involvement in your child, and especially with older children, we can use questions during this time period. So no questions. For younger children, no questions. For older children, you want to be careful, right? If your questions are going to sound negative, if your questions are going to sound condescending, right? If your questions are going to sound judgmental, we don't want that, right? Special time for adolescents should be a judge-free zone, a criticism-free zone. for sure. If you could kind of ask questions to open them up and to talk about things that they're passionate and excited about, that's a great thing. But that's a good question. It's a fine line. And no technology. And that's really key. Unfortunately, in today's day and age, when we all have our cell phones around, some of us have really real, obligations with our cell phones for work. Parenting has become kind of a different art, and so many incredible moments of parenting are actually missed out on because we're kind of looking at our cell phone, checking new Facebook updates, right? Checking different things that don't seem like such big deals in the moment, but actually over time really take away from the parent-child relationship. This is an interesting picture that went viral of a young man who was whale watching, right? And you see he's kind of texting as like this majestic whale, like surfaces feet away from him. And if we think about what this means for ourselves and our children, our own ability to kind of create special time with our children and relationships with our children, if we have our cell phones out, that means by definition we're not giving them our full attention because our boss is in our pocket, our friend is in our pocket, our family members are in our pocket, and we're not kind of having this one-on-one time with our child alone. So something else that's really important for special time with older children is a process called empathetic perspective taking. And there's been some research on kind of what differentiates outstanding teachers, right? We all have had outstanding teachers in our own life that kind of stick out in our own mind from typical teachers, teachers who just kind of clock in and clock out and do their daily work. And one really interesting difference that emerged was that outstanding teachers and typical teachers both describe empathizing with a student when they feel like a student has a valid complaint. So if a student will come in talking about a family illness, both typical and outstanding teachers will empathize with the student. The difference between the two groups, however, emerges when a child complains about something that the teacher doesn't necessarily think is valid, right? So I got in trouble for violating the dress code, right? At that moment, that's when kind of the difference emerges. Typical teachers will say, well, you had it coming, right? It was your fault. You should have listened to the dress code. Whereas outstanding teachers, kind of across the board, seem to be able to do something called empathetic perspective taking and distinguish between validating, right, what the child did, but also empathizing, right? So they might not validate that it's okay, yes, please don't listen to the dress code from now on, but they could say, wow, like that's so annoying to be in trouble. It hurts so much to be in trouble, and kind of empathize in that moment. And for parents, that could be incredibly helpful as well when we're able, I'm just going to pull up a video, when we're able to actually empathize with friends, family members, spouses, and children, even in times when we don't necessarily agree with what the child did. I'm going to show you this quick video.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you're going down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. And we do it all the time, because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. At least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
Another kind of really important element of parenting and teaching as well, so this is helpful to know when you're picking out teachers for your children or trying to kind of work with your children's teachers, is that specifically for the research done on teachers, something that distinguishes overall, kind of an overarching theme that distinguishes the outstanding teachers from the typical teachers, is that outstanding teachers seem to really genuinely like their students, right? They genuinely convey to their students that they are liked, like really liked, right? And it's not something that you could fake because a child is very sensitive to kind of the rapport that they build with adults. And for parenting as well, this could be something really salient and important. Oftentimes I'm trying to work with the child's teacher, right, in a school setting, and you could put in behavioral techniques from here until tomorrow, but if a teacher doesn't like a child, that dynamic is very much enmeshed in what's going on in the classroom. So sometimes the first step is to even just get a teacher to find something that they like in a child. The child's dimples, the child is kind to other children, whatever, the child's mischievous in a cute way, whatever it is, right? The teacher has to kind of find a way to really like a child. And the same is true with parents sometimes. We obviously love our children, but sometimes liking our children could be really hard. And the more we could get ourselves to be in that place where we like our children, where we could kind of recognize the cuteness and amazingness and the potential of our children, the better we'll be in kind of building that strong relationship with our children. Because our children are exceptionally sensitive to that. And it's not something that we could fake. The fourth behavioral tool, which is really key, is something called active constructive responding. So this actually is drawing from research on marriages and positive marriages. And there was a really interesting kind of number of studies done about how to kind of evaluate whether or not a relationship was positive. And one very telltale sign of whether or not a relationship, whether it be with a spouse or a child or a friend, is positive is the way we actually respond to the other person when the other person shares exciting news with us, right? So let's say our spouse comes home and says, I got a fantastic promotion at work today, right? How we respond in that moment is really, really key. So there are 4 different kinds of responses that we could have, right? We could have active constructive responding. Wow, that's incredible. This is so exciting. This is the best news ever. Active destructive responding, like, oh great, are they gonna expect more of you now, right? Are you gonna have longer hours in the office right now? Is this gonna mean bad things for our family? Kind of showing them the downside of their good news. Passive constructive responding, so that's kind of like a muted response, like, that's nice, dear. And then there's passive destructive responding, right? So a response that conveys disinterest. It rained all day here. Do you think it's gonna rain tomorrow? Right? Kind of not even responding to what we have. And the way that we could sometimes evaluate our own relationships is kind of see how we react when people share positive news with us. And if we're consistently using active, constructive responses, right, really enthusiastic responses that joins with the person's happiness in the moment, that's usually a sign of a great marriage. That's usually a sign of a great relationship. And what's really cool about this is we could be really conscious of the response that we are having to our children when they share things with us, to our spouses when they share things with us, and to our friends when they share things with us. And we could actually be very cognizant of how we're reacting in the moment and use more active constructive responding to build a relationship. One parent, actually, of a child who's struggling very much in school, told me that she learned this, she got it, she really tried to use it. And her child came home, and her other children were very gifted academically, but this one child came home with like an 88 on his spelling test, and he was so happy, and the mom didn't really usually think that was such a good grade, but he was like, Mommy, look, I got an 88 on my spelling test. And the mom was like, active constructive responding, I'm gonna do it. And she kind of like got down to eye level with him and said, wow, I am so excited, like I'm so happy. And the child was beaming so much that the mom just had tears in her eyes. Like she could not believe how powerful that was for her child and for that relationship in the moment. The fifth behavioral tool, and there's one more, the fifth behavioral tool is something called acts of kindness. And this is actually really critical for ourselves and also for our children. There's a lot of data to indicate what we might guess, right, is that happy people tend to engage in more pro-social interactions, right? And it's kind of a positive cycle. When we're feeling happier, we want to do more acts of kindness for people. And when we do more acts of kindness, we actually become happier. So there's a really interesting study in which the researchers gave two groups of people, right? They gave one group of people $5, half the people $5 and $20, and the other group also $5 and $20. And they told one group of people to spend it on themselves, and one group of people to spend it on others. So people who spent it on others gave donations to the poor. They purchased toys for siblings. What was really, really fascinating was that after they kind of asked them which group felt happier in the moment, and the group that actually gave away the money, the $5 or $20, actually felt significantly happier than the other group. And what was really interesting is the amount of money actually didn't matter. They felt just as happy giving away $5 as $20. What was really significant about this finding is for us as parents, right? If we feel like our child is struggling in different areas, if we want to actually set them up for the greatest happiness, right, that they could kind of achieve, or just a lot more happiness in their lives, something that we could be doing is engaging them in these acts of kindness, whether it be baking cupcakes for, iShine, Chai Lifeline, and dropping it off, or taking them to Tomchei Shabbos, having them pick out candy in the supermarket and bringing it over. Involving them in really positive acts of kindness could be really crucial for their levels of happiness. And more importantly, also their sense of self-efficacy. Sometimes our schools aren't the best at giving a child a sense of self-efficacy of, I can do this, I can succeed, I can do this. But when they actually engage in acts of kindness, whether it be visiting a nursing home, giving something out, making something for someone, they could actually feel more confident in themselves. It also could help them build better relationships, have more social skills, and actually trigger an upward spiral of positive emotions and positive social interactions. Several years ago on TV, there was a TV show, I never actually saw it, but it was called True Beauty. And in this TV show, what they had contestants do is actually compete as if it was an outer beauty contest, right, which many of these shows are. And I think the winner was supposed to have received $100,000 and be featured in People magazine's top 100 most beautiful people. But what they didn't tell participants was that it was actually an inner beauty contest. And what they would do each week on the show is kind of have all these contestants compete in fashion shoots or model shoots. And on their way, as the contestants were walking into the studio or at different points throughout the session, they would kind of set up a scenario. So for example, right, in one case, the actresses were kind of walking into the building in which they would get their photo shoot. And outside, there was an old man on the street who kind of like dropped his lunch, apple fell across the sidewalk, and they videotaped each participant to see what they would do in the moment. And it was really fascinating to see, I imagine, because some participants would kind of kick the apple, some participants would kind of step on the sandwich, and some participants would actually get on the floor and pick it up and hand it back to the old man. And at the end of each episode, one person would get kicked off the show, and obviously they were very disappointed. And after they got kicked off into the show, that contestant would then be brought into a room and told, actually, this wasn't an outer beauty contest, it was an inner beauty contest. And then they would replay for them the scene that happened with the old man, or the scene that happened in that episode. And it struck me as a very kind of powerful mashal for us, because we live in a world, right, that's all about outer beauty, right? We live in a world feels all about how nice our car is and how glamorous our children look and how great this is. But what happens is we get to the next world and Hashem says, no, it wasn't an outer beauty competition, it was an inner beauty. It was all about inner beauty. And we replayed all the scenarios where we helped people and when we actually showed great kindness to other people and are told that that's what counts. And I think this is especially important message for our children because schools could be really daunting, right? Schools could be brutal for our children. And it feels so much like it's all about outer beauty. But there's one area in which kind of the playing field is leveled for every single child, regardless of learning disability, regardless of kind of anything else. And that is the area of inner beauty. And that's an area in which every child really has the ability to shine and to get involved. So a really fascinating finding was that a depressed or anxious person who spends more time helping others than watching TV actually shows a reduction in symptoms over time. Even toddlers are happier when giving treats away to others than kind of keeping them for themselves. And sometimes when we educate our children that kind of the struggles that we go through in lives are really opportunities to help others, this message could be even more powerful. And we know that Chazal teaches that part of the reason, right, we go through something hard in our life is so that we could recognize that feeling in ourselves and help someone else, who's in that same situation. And I'm sure you guys are familiar with the miracle, right, on the Hudson, where a pilot was able to kind of have a miracle landing in recent years, right? A plane took off from a New York airport several years ago and had engine failure and had to find a place to land. And the captain, who was Captain Sully, was able to actually do like a magnificent feat of piloting ingenuity and land the plane in the Hudson River, actually saving every single person's life on the plane. And they asked the pilot many times how he was able to do it. He really shunned away from the limelight. He really didn't want to be involved. He didn't want to kind of be in the public eye. A year after the Miracle on the Hudson, on the 1-year anniversary of the Miracle on the Hudson, they actually, one reporter got a kind of an exclusive interview with this pilot, and he took him to a location overlooking the Hudson River where this miracle on the Hudson had occurred. And they asked him, seriously, like, what made you able to land the plane in that moment? And he said, when I was a child, no one loved me more than my father. My father loved me, so there was no one in my life who loved me more than my father. And when I was very young, my father died. And I remember the pain and the blackness that I felt when he died. And I vowed to do whatever I can in my life not to let anyone ever feel that pain and that feeling of blackness ever again. When the engines were failing that day, all I could think about was the families of the people on board, on the flight, and the blackness that they would feel if all of these people lost their life. And that put me into such a state of concentration and fervor that I was able to land the plane. When we think about the power of teaching our children to grow from their experiences, to grow from bullying by making sure other kids don't get bullied, to grow from hard life circumstances by making sure that other kids in the future can be great. It's incredible to think about what we could do for the world. And we know that so many amazing organizations, right, in the secular world and the Jewish world, were founded because of people who went through hard things and said, I want to change this for someone else. The last tool that I want to discuss with you today is something called savoring. And this is something that's especially important for many of us. So savoring basically refers to our awareness of pleasure and our really deliberate attempt to make it last. So Bryant contrasts the psychology of savoring and the psychology of coping. So in coping, right, we experience a negative effect, a negative event, and that produces negative feelings, right, sadness, anxiety, whatever it is. And we then attempt to kind of deal with those feelings by doing something, generally either changing ourselves or changing the situation. So, for example, let's say we got a poor evaluation at work, right? We might feel upset and awful. We might worry. What are some things we might worry about? What? I might get fired. Yeah, what else?
Less hours.
Less hours. I'll cut down my hours. We might be sad about, what might we be sad about?
Negative feedback.
Negative feedback doesn't feel good for us either, right? Right? We might be sad about possibly losing our job. We might be sad about that someone said something negative to us or about us. And as a result, what might we do? Take a bubble bath, right? Chill out, talk to a friend, cry about it. So suppose instead that we receive like an awesome evaluation at work, accompanied by a merit raise, a pat on the back, our name permanently etched in the Employee of the Month on the plaque in the lobby. How do we cope with that event? I hope you're smiling or laughing. Right, well hopefully, right? But how do we cope with it? So the answer is that it's a funny question, right? You should be laughing because really we shouldn't have to cope with that event. That's a positive event. But the reality is that often a lot of times we actually do in effect cope with even life's triumphs, right? We marry off a child and then we're nervous about the wedding and wondering how we can get through that. Even with a job promotion, we might worry that others will resent us. We might conclude that they don't really know how bad we are and soon they'll know and then everything will fall through. So a lot of times, even when we go through a really positive event, we end up kind of coping with it instead of savoring of it. But what's really important about savoring is that people who generally savor, right, as opposed to cope, are actually happier and more satisfied with life, more optimistic, and also less depressed than those who don't savor. And what's really kind of significant is that even when we do feel happiness, right, or a positive emotion, many times we're not actually experiencing the emotion of happiness. It's kind of like a jelly belly, right? Instead of having like the watermelon itself, we have like a little jelly belly version of the watermelon. A lot of times when we even let ourselves feel a small amount of happiness, we're not even feeling real happiness, right? We're feeling like a watered down representation, like, oh, I'm happy, and then we move on to the next thing. We don't actually allow ourselves to really be flooded with the emotion of happiness and really strongly feel happiness in the moment. And if we think about it, there are so many moments of parenting, right, that could and should be savored. A parent of a child who has many disabilities told me recently that something that was really powerful for her about savoring was she just tried to savor, like once in a while her child just like flashed a big smile, you know, and like her eyes kind of lit up with happiness, and she decided like, I'm going to savor those moments. And instead of kind of running to the meatballs and the next thing and the thing I'm working on next, like I'm just gonna let myself look at my child and really feel genuine happiness and be flooded with genuine happiness in that moment, as opposed to just noticing happy, like the jelly belly version of emotion, and moving on to the next thing. And when we really sit with that emotion and let ourselves actually feel happiness intensely and be flooded with happiness, as opposed to kind of robotically moving on to the next thing in our lives, the whole quality of our life changes. And when we can find the things that are really cute and really beautiful and really special about our child and zero in on those things with lightning amount of focus, and let ourselves actually look at our child and feel happy, and not just the watered down version of happiness, but feel really, really happy in that moment. It could be life transforming for many of us. And we know that there are so many kind of moments in our life. We pass by, you know, a beautiful flower stand selling flowers before Shavuos, and we could kind of like look the other way, or we could look at the flowers and savor how beautiful they are and how nice they are and how kind of the shades are so beautiful, and let ourselves actually pause and really appreciate it in the moment. So for your home-based exercise, you didn't know you were having homework today. For your home-based exercise, I'd like you to please stop and notice. Next time anything good or pleasurable or enjoyable occurs, a praise at work, right? A good feedback, a great meal, and just savor the event. And you could use the following strategies. Kind of zooming in on some elements of the experience, blocking out others, taking a mental picture of the experience. And if we remember that pleasure is available to almost all, right, as well as the ability to enhance it. And when we make savoring a practice in our life, it could be really, really powerful and empowering to us. So I know that I can get questions at the end, but Chinuch is very much about the dreams and the hopes of our children. So I just want to end today by sharing a dream and a hope. My dream is that every parent could find tremendous happiness in savoring in the moments, the cuteness, and the moments and the wonderfulness that they spend with their children. And my hope is that we could spread this message to many different parents, and in the process help improve many, many lives. Thank you so much. I'm around for questions if anyone wants to come up. Thank you so much.